Hey, folks, this is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, episodes of the Texas Titans podcast. This is the Friends of Herb episode, where I get the opportunity to visit with three, not only Texas Titan alum, but three close friends of the legendary CEO and co founder of Southwest Airlines, Herb Kelleher. So, first, you've got Jim Bayless, who's a personal mentor of mine and basically knew Herb Kelleher back before Southwest Airlines was even a thing. And so he gives a little bit of background on how this now legendary airline, the one that seems to turn a profit no matter what's going on in the world, how it even came into being, as well as some of the forces that fought against the existence of Southwest Airlines. Then you've got Dr. Bill Cunningham, the former president of the University of Texas, the former chancellor of the UT system, and I think we determined that he's the longest sitting board member at this time of Southwest Airlines. And then you've got Senator John Monfort, former state senator John Monfort, former chancellor of Texas Tech, and just an incredible guy, one of my favorite Texas Titans, and also a longtime member of the Southwest Airlines board of directors. But besides knowing Herb Kelleher in just the professional relationships that these guys had with him, they were also very close friends of Herb's. So in this episode, not only do we get to hear firsthand accounts of what made this legendary business titan of industry what he was and why he was so successful, but also just some of the funny stories that there are about Herb, because this guy, I wish I could have known him. And to me, this is like the second best thing to getting to have the man on the show himself. It's these guys that have firsthand accounts of this larger than life, wild turkey drinking, chain smoking character that was Herb Kelleher. You find out the stories of why Southwest Airlines culture is what it is. So much of that had to do with Herb Kelleher. He truly loved people. And that's one of the things that keeps coming up through this interview, you'll find. So, with that, please enjoy this special episode of the Texas Titans podcast. And to my dear, dear friends, Jim Bayless, John Monfort, and Bill Cunningham, thank you guys for being a part of what I think is probably one of the most special episodes of the Texas Titans podcast to date. Enjoy. All right, gentlemen, I have waited for this episode of the Texas Titans podcast like a little kid for Christmas. Thank you all so much. I'm titling this the Friends of Herb episode because all of you go way back with definitely probably one of the top five most legendary Texas executives ever. And that, of course, is Herb Kelleher, the former co-founder and CEO of Southwest Airlines. So this is not only going to be about Herb. This is going to be kind of about as Bayless, as you just mentioned offline, the genesis of Southwest in general. So I just want to tell the audience really quick, as someone who has gone to business school, there's one executive and one company that seemed to be, at least at SMU, and I think this is probably throughout most business school programs, there's an executive and a company that gets mentioned over and over in organizational behavior, in management accounting. It's multiple classes, and that is Southwest Airlines and Herb Kelleher and his leadership. And it's quite remarkable the impact that company and Herb left on the business community. So I'm thrilled to dive deeper into the stories of some folks that knew him best. And by the way, all three Texas Titan alums. That's Senator John Monfort. Thank you so much, sir, for being here. That is Dr. Bill Cunningham. Thank you so much for being here. And then my mentor, my brother from another mother, the Godfather himself, James Bayless. I am so glad you're here. And so with that, since you were there as one of the legal minds that helped kick off, if you will, the history of Southwest Airlines, Bayless, why don't you get us started? Talk about and take it wherever you want. The beginnings of Southwest Airlines, when Herb comes into the picture. The floor is yours, my friend.
Well, thank you, Jason, for having us. Little did I know when I met Herb when I was 27 years old, working in Washington as legislative counsel to Senator John Tower, that our friendship would intertwine in multiple ways, almost from cradle to grave, literally. And I'll get into that later. But in the beginning, Herb Kelleher knocked on Senator Tower's door in 1979 with a real problem. And that is his revolutionary discount carrier, Southwest Airlines, which at the time was an intra-state carrier linking Dallas Love Field, Houston Hobby, and San Antonio, was the target of a relentless campaign in Congress at the behest of American Airlines, the Southwest Airlines competitors, American Airlines and Braniff, as well as the cities of Dallas and Fort Worth and the embryonic airport of DFW airport, to basically kill Southwest Airlines in the crib, because it was a genuine economic threat to their market share. And so this is a classic illustration of how Congress is often used or perhaps misused, and why legislation is deliberately made difficult by the founding fathers. And what happened in this case is that the entrenched business interests of Dallas and Fort Worth, namely Braniff and American, sought to take advantage of the legislative process by means of a particular measure that had already passed the Senate to append that bill with legislative language that would prevent Southwest Airlines from becoming an interstate carrier, which was their design. Think of the tremendous markets of New Orleans with the booming energy economy, as well as Oklahoma City, as well as other cities to which Southwest Airlines sought to extend its footprint eventually. So the opposing forces allied with Jim Wright, who then was the Democratic majority leader, to basically subvert the legislative process in many ways. Now, mind you that Southwest Airlines was born in 1971. Prior to that, in 1968, the Civil Aeronautics Board directed the cities of Dallas and Fort Worth to phase out Love Field, as well as Amon Carter Field in Fort Worth, to encourage traffic to flow out of the brand new DFW airport. And the city fathers, quite understandably, were worried about the bonded indebtedness of DFW, because this was a huge, undertaking. So DFW opens in '74. Southwest Airlines was compelled to move out of Love Field to DFW, which would defeat the advantage of a close-in airport of Love Field for the business travelers, as well as vacation and weekend travelers as well, which was Southwest Airlines niche. So Southwest Airlines argued in court and eventually in the Congress that, hey, look, Southwest Airlines was not privy to the 1968 agreement. The CAB is not applicable to Southwest. Southwest is an intrastate carrier, not an interstate carrier, so the federal government didn't have any standing. So in any event, the thing that came into sharp relief in 1978, Congress, in its wisdom, passes the Airline Deregulation Act, basically to trumpet that competition beats government regulation. But the irony is overwhelming, to try to kill an upstart carrier that can do its economic jujitsu over the big carriers. So it gets down to personal relationships, like everything else in life. So Herb Kelleher beseeches Senator Tower for help. Senator Tower had every instinct to help, notwithstanding the easy alibi that he could use to cite his personal friendships with the city fathers of Dallas and Fort Worth, Mayor Eric Johnson, founder of TI, and other stalwarts of both cities, to take a pass. But no, free markets above all. So Tower was not properly situated on the relevant Senate committee. The Senate Committee of Relevance with the Senate Commerce Committee, and specifically the subcommittee dealing with aviation. So the right person was Senator Bob Packwood of Oregon, who on the surface would have absolutely nothing to do, no interest in helping a carrier in Texas. Southwest Airlines didn't serve Portland, Oregon, or anywhere else in his state. But getting back to personal relationships, Tower asks Barry Goldwater, his mentor in the Senate, chairman of the full Senate Commerce Committee, for assistance. Goldwater turns around and says, okay, the right guy is Packwood. So Packwood is very obedient to his colleagues, Senators Goldwater and Tower. Serendipitously, Packwood happened to be a classmate at New York University Law School with Herb Kelleher. So that was enough to launch the ship. Fast forward, Jim Wright, the antagonist, sits into a Senate House Conference Committee in a cramped room of the U.S. Capitol, where I was a sardine in the sardine can, watching this legislative jujitsu between Jim Wright, known for his florid oratory, and Bob Packwood, who was sharp as he could be. Packwood ran circles around Jim Wright, who was completely agog and flustered. Packwood made the winning arguments that I just cited that Southwest Airlines had made in the courthouses, and they had an unblemished record in the courthouses, mind you, arguing not privy to the 1968 agreement, no role for the federal government, CAB is not applicable to an intrastate carrier, and come on, the hypocrisy is overwhelming. On one hand, Congress extols the virtues of free enterprise, right. Witness the Airline Deregulation Act passed just a year before, but it illustrates the protectionist instincts of Congress and the temptation to use raw political muscle to insulate constituent business interests from a competitive marketplace.
No, other than that doesn't happen. Come on. Government doesn't interfere with business.
So the result of this surprising resistance by Senator Packwood resulted in a compromise, otherwise known as the famous or infamous Wright Amendment, which hobbled Southwest Airlines for a number of years, but did allow Southwest Airlines to operate out of Love Field to the 4 contiguous states, thus protecting the highly sought after, New Orleans market, if you will. And then over time, the last vestiges of the Wright Amendment, which had been reduced over the years, finally was repealed in toto on Halloween of 2014. And as Herb Kelleher, colorful as always with his oratory himself, said that with regard to the Wright Amendment, he says, the Wright Amendment is a pain in the ass, but not every pain in the ass is a constitutional infringement. So he just lived with it, but the good guys won. And hence his reputation as the business folk hero of all time, which is the perfect segue to Senator Monfort and Bill Cunningham to extol him from their seats in the boardroom.
Yeah, I think that's perfect to now that, because I guarantee you that the listeners had no idea that the labor that was, that, as you say, gave birth to Southwest Airlines was being, that all the physicians in the room were a bunch of damn politicians, almost, almost doing everything they could to prevent it. And so, Dr. Cunningham, so I'd like to start with you, and here's the take it anywhere you want to, but I'd like to know where you met Herb for the first time, but also as an academic. As a man of letters in the world of business, this guy he kind of wrote the book. I mean, he was one of the innovators. I mean, some of the things that he did as a leader, as an executive, had never been done. And the guy's a lawyer. First of all, he never asked to be, that wasn't he took an atypical route, I suppose. So I'd like, if you would, just to not only cover your meeting with him, any great anecdotes, but just as from a clinical standpoint, academic standpoint, what made Herb Kelleher so special?
Well, I first met Herb probably around 1980. And I was a young associate dean in the business school working for George Kosmetzky. And Herb was chairman of the Business School Foundation, which was, no question about it, a number of the most powerful business leaders in Texas. Jim Bayless' dad was part of it, for example. And all of a sudden, I was introduced to Herb. And as we say, an associate dean is a mouse studying to be a rat. Okay? So I was learning all the things I needed to learn. And Herb Kelleher gave me the full Kelleher effect. I mean, I got everything that you could know, the Kelleher treatment. He was nice to me. He was interested in me. He wanted to know what I was trying to do, where I was trying to go. It turned out, of course, that Herb gave everybody the Kelleher treatment, the full Kelleher treatment. And I think that really is at the beginning where as I look back, I could see why Southwest was so effective. And we'll come back to that maybe when we talk a little bit about why Southwest was so effective. I would like to add one thing onto what Jim Bayless said. Southwest, in its history, needs to thank Braniff, Continental, and Trans-Texas for supporting Southwest. Most people don't understand that. And what I mean by that is they got together and were found guilty of a conspiracy to restrain trade. And as a result of their triple damages, that helped fund Southwest for several years. So I want to lay it on the record that we appreciate the support that Braniff, Trans-Texas, and Continental gave us.
Well, and now correct me if I'm wrong. Now, Dr. Cunningham, either you or Senator which one of y'all, Senator Monfort, are you the longest sitting board member? Is it you, Dr. Cunningham?
Well, I think among the current class
of
directors, I'm the longest serving director. There may be a couple of them like Sam Barshop and Clint Murchison who go back. If we really would check the history books, they may have served longer than we have.
Okay.
But at least in this current class, I'm the longest serving.
Okay. I knew it was one of you. Now, Senator Monfort, when do you meet? Now, you were in the Senate, I think you said, the first time you met him. So kind of talk about how you get introduced to this New Jersey born and raised attorney that's now a CEO and co-founder of an upstart airline.
Well, I can't remember exactly the conversation, but I was in my Senate office one afternoon and my assistant comes in, kind of a sheepish grin on her face, and says, "Hey, there's a guy out here named Herb Kelleher who wants to meet with you. And I think he's the guy in the commercial where somebody dropped a quarter in the cup." If you recall that commercial,
Yeah.
It certainly had a lasting impression on Linda, my assistant. That was the way she identified with him. And that was the beginning of a great friendship. Make no mistake about it, Herb Kelleher was one of the most brilliant, articulate business leaders that I have ever had the experience or the delight of working with. He had that sheer quality of genius, plus the enormously powerful personality to go with it. And the fact, I think that day he came by the Capitol, he canvassed every Senate member on my side of the Capitol, talking about Southwest Airlines and how important it was to support the concept of Southwest Airlines. So that was the beginning of a long friendship. And in fact, in my book, which I'll mention a little later, there's a chapter about the importance of returning phone calls. And Herb Kelleher taught me one huge lesson about returning phone calls, because I'd been chancellor at Tech for 5 years. And I left in 2001 to go be president of Southwestern Bell Telephone, which was the most shocking thing to me and all my friends because I didn't know anything about running a telephone company. But anyway, I had changed cell phones. I had a cell phone at Tech that had a different number than the one I had when I went to work for, at that time, SBC and Ed Whitaker. So several months later, I run into Herb at a black tie event. And we exchanged greetings and pleasantries. And he said, "Say, I'm really sorry that you weren't interested in coming on the board." And I said, "Well, what are you talking about, Herb?" He said, "Well, I left a message on your dang cell phone several months ago and you never called me back." Of course, I nearly had a stroke because that was the old cell phone that had been obviously discontinued. So I made a point in my book, the last book I wrote about serving on boards, how critical it is to return your phone calls and don't leave any gaps in your coverage. But those were a couple of my initial forays with a man whom I consider to be one of the great entrepreneurs in America.
Let me ask both of
I
you.
might add just something for fun.
Yeah, go ahead.
How I was invited to join the board of Southwest Airlines, okay? Because it was very important to me. I was stepping down as chancellor of the University of Texas system. It was in 2000. And I was looking around for opportunities. I was serving on several corporate boards, but of course, Southwest was wonderful. And Sam Barshop approached me from San Antonio. And Sam said, "Would you be interested in serving on the Southwest Airlines board?" And I said, "I would love to serve on the Southwest board. I would walk to Dallas if it required me to do that." And he said, "Well, I think you're going to get a call from Herb Kelleher in a few days, and you ought to be watching for it." And I said, "Well, when, Sam?" And he told me the date I should expect the call. And my office was on red alert for that call. And the call came in, and it was Herb Kelleher. And we had about 10 seconds of pleasantries. And I think I said yes before he made the offer. So, yes, I was waiting for it with great enthusiasm.
Well, and here's something while we're on the subject of boards, before we go, just kind of to some, I want to get back to you, Bayless, and I want to talk about your first interaction with Herb. But you guys having worked on the board with him, I mean, my God, it's an airline. Airlines are just notoriously tough businesses. Yet there is one that always makes money, and that is Southwest Airlines. Throughout that history, Herb Kelleher comes and says, "We're going to turn our planes around on time every time," or that was either his or somebody's idea. He said, "We're going to start serving little bags of peanuts. We're going to let people choose their own seat. There is no first class." I mean, there were some crazy things along the way and navigating the waters, the stormy waters that every airline finds itself in. As board members, if you've got a story, or how would Herb come to you as a board and make you go, "Hey, yeah, we're facing some both literal as well as figurative headwinds as an airline, but here's what we're going to do"? How would he handle crisis? How would he present to you guys a new crazy idea like peanuts and no first class? Take us through those stories that now we just take for granted. Like I told you, my daughter's going to be on a Southwest flight today, and she's just going to be standing in line waiting to board and pick her seat. That's something Southwest Airlines did. So talk to us about those meetings.
John, maybe I can start here just a second and you jump in, but maybe it'd be fun to talk for a few minutes about why Southwest has been so successful.
Love that.
Okay. And there's a number of factors. There's a couple, I think, that are really important. And John and I can play off each other because we both can give this talk very, very easily. But I think first thing is he democratized flying. That is, Herb Kelleher understood, either someone told him or he innately understood it, that it was a very elastic demand. And that is, if you reduce the price, you dramatically increase the number of people who will buy the product. And so he started off by going into medium-sized markets where we had traditional airlines charging a high price for kind of second quality service. And Southwest Airlines came along and said, wow, those are the markets for us. We will charge a lower price and we will dramatically increase the number of people who fly on our airplanes. And it turns out the FAA now calls it the Southwest Airlines effect. And it has dramatically changed the nature of flying in the United States. People now can go see grandparents and grandchildren and do business. I don't know how many people have told me, my business is organized around the Southwest Airlines flight schedule because I can go there. And that didn't happen before. So that changed the whole nature of it. Now, let me bounce it back to John, and then I'll come back and talk about a couple of other things.
I agree. I think he had a very, very effective business plan for an airline. He just simply knew what it would take to make it work and make it profitable. But you couple that with one of the world's most dynamic personalities. We had thousands of people working at Southwest Airlines, and I was amazed at how many of those people, almost each one, felt like they personally knew Herb Kelleher. It was amazing the depth and reach that his personality had. He made the Southwest effect. He made people feel as they were each an important component for the success of the team. And that business model, coupled with his personality, in my view, generated the Southwest effect. And it has been and still is very effective. And I attribute, you use the word democratize, Cunningham. I felt like the board meetings initially, when they lasted a half day, were more of a benevolent dictatorship.
Well, let me jump in on that, John, because it was in today's Southwest Airlines, when we have a retreat once every year, and we go off campus, so to speak, and we'll bring in JP Morgan, and we'll bring in McKinsey, and we'll bring in experts from people around the country who are experts that we don't normally get exposed to, and we'll have management talk to us. In Herb's era, and that's the way that makes a lot of sense. That's the way boards ought to operate. Step back, what's going to happen? In Herb's era, he would, at the end of one of the meetings, he would pull out his famous yellow legal pad, right, John? And he would say, let me talk to you about strategy. We've already had a half a day meeting, a 2/3 day meeting. Now we do this in 3 days. But Herb would say, let me tell you about where I think we are and where we're going. And we would all sit there and listen like potted plants, because we were listening to the smartest guy in the room. We were listening to the guy who knew more about airline business than anybody. And he was outlining for us the strategy that Southwest needed to take over the next 1, 3, and 5 years. And he was also talking about what we're going to have to do tactically to be successful. So there was no reason to have a 3-day retreat. We had the number one guy there, and it was a dictatorship, John. I agree with you on that.
I think it was a benevolent dictatorship, but there's just no way you could. I was astounded by the genius of this man, intellectually and personally, in running an airline. He just amazed me, and then he was always hands-on. I mean, he would go to Washington repeatedly. He'd go to Austin. He'd go wherever he needed to go to get the job done. He was an extremely effective communicator, individually or amongst a group. And, you give him a little wild turkey and a cigarette, he could talk for hours about how the right way to run an airline. I think we still have is it Wild Turkey Kelleher Reserve now?
Right.
But again, it was a great time for me, and I know for the rest of the board, to really learn from a true genius of American business.
Yeah, that's the thing that I can't imagine, as someone who's a student of business and is intrigued by the, quote unquote science of business, to have been able to watch a master at work like that. And Bayless, going back to let's go kind of like in a book. Let's have a flashback again. Those early days, and you start and you meet Herb. What does that look like? And then some of the exchanges that you had with him through the years as a wordsmith yourself. I've tried to keep pace with you to no avail, but I still say that I'm an apprentice to Bayless. I haven't received my actual associate's title yet. Talk about some of those early days and your first interactions with Herb.
Yes, I will. As a footnote to what Bill and John have described from their up close and personal relationship with Herb in the boardroom, what Herb managed to do through his Peanuts fairs and humor, and I must salute his right hand, Colleen Barrett, who was basically in charge of culture. And everyone knows the utterly hilarious series of ads that Southwest Airlines would manage to do very pithily on posters and billboards around the state and television. But what he managed to do was shrink Texas. And by that, I mean that you could get from point A to point B for $55 and within 55 minutes.
Yeah.
And that had the geographic phenomenon effect of making El Paso, just an hour away. It's a remarkable accomplishment to shrink Texas economically, but that's what he did.
Very well put.
I must say that so many years, decades after I first knew Herb, when I was practicing law in Washington, we also represented Southwest Airlines. They were notorious, speaking of Peanuts, they were notorious in their unwillingness to pay any of their hired guns anything but peanuts. But again, the bragging rights to represent that you had a professional relationship with Southwest was all of the remuneration you could ever want, even though it was not in legal tender. Fast forward, I recounted a number of these stories in a memoir that I wrote, a few years ago, that is basically a compilation of very funny stories about my interactions with name brand people in Washington who basically are very human after hours, and it's very funny collection. But when I sent Herb a copy of my memoir, that triggered a characteristically hilarious back and forth exchange of snail mail and emails. And he took great delight, often with a very long needle, in both expressing his appreciation as well as torpedoing his friends. And I must read a couple of excerpts from some of the correspondence that he and I exchanged. After accusing me of being on the sauce in my complimentary cover note, as well as wondering aloud whether my editor likewise was on the sauce when he helped me in the compilation of my materials, he wrote me a letter pointing out with great pride, apparently, that there was a typo on page 247 and another on page 259, and went on to spell specifically the error. And these were mechanical errors, not my error, naturally. And he says, "Why do I tell you this? As Plato might say, there is a conjury of reasons." He was big on vocabulary. Number one, to enable you to rebuke your publisher for his carelessness. Number two, to enable you to curse me as an OCD nerd. And number three, most importantly, to prove that I read your book from stem to stern. And then he goes into this sidebar of his unathletic being. And because he always associates me with tennis, he told me these hilarious stories about his own brush with tennis. And John will appreciate this. He was saying that decades ago, he was at the San Antonio Country Club exhibiting, his complete lack of capability on the court, and the club pro and tennis phenom Clarence Mabry, who had basically given birth to the Trinity University tennis program, which was so phenomenal, He said that Clarence Mabry told him that Herb had, through anticipation, speed, and quickness, brought the worst tennis form he had ever seen in a match to its, quote, absolute peak. And then he goes on to liken himself in a doubles match to being a box turtle with arthritis. So he was nothing if not colorful in his prose. The only other thing that I would add is, again, fast forward many years after my first encounter with Herb, thanks to Bill Cunningham, who famously would have a dinner every year featuring Herb as the focal point to coincide with Herb's guest lecture, which John Monford pointed out was always an assignment delegated by the nominal professor, Bill Cunningham. I asked Herb, I just cornered him as he was nursing his 18th wild turkey. I said, now, Herb, let me just ask you, because I'm a member of the Texas State Cemetery Committee. I said, would there be any circumstance, Herb, under which you would consider submitting an application for burial at the state cemetery? And he pauses for about as long as Bill Cunningham did in his conversation with Herb, and prior to that with Sam Barshop. And he looks at me and he goes, yes, there is a circumstance under which I'd be happy to file an application for burial. So that triggered, again, a burst of correspondence back and forth that is very, very funny. So I sent him a formal letter. And by the way, this is a statutory responsibility that I have. Literally, it's written in the statutes of the state of Texas that I have to, I'm charged with recruitment. And so who better a recruit than Herb Kelleher? And I might add that Bill Cunningham was another one of my prize recruits. It's a coupon that need not be redeemed anytime soon, I hasten to add. But what struck Herb like a 2x4 upside the head was when I explained that he was a natural for burial at State Cemetery, given the presence of the iconic former general, not general of merely one army, but actually a general in 3 national armies. And that was Albert Sidney Johnston. Went to West Point, classmate of Jefferson Davis. He serves as his military obligation, starting off as a private in the U.S. Army. He ends up being a general. Fast forward, the Texas Revolution. He goes to Texas and is general in the Republic of Texas Army. Fast forward, Civil War. His buddy Jefferson Davis, gives him a shout out and says, "We need you to help the Confederacy." So he becomes a general in the Confederate Army. He's killed in the Battle of Shiloh. He was hit in the lower leg. He didn't feel it because he had been in a duel earlier in his life, and the lower leg in which he was shot was paralyzed and he had no feeling. And so he died of loss of blood. And he was buried first in New Orleans. And then later he was disinterred and reinterred in a very noticeable birdcage looking crypt on the grounds of the Texas State Cemetery. And when he was reinterred, or when his body arrived in Austin, the body was perfectly well preserved, which was remarkable given the passage of time. Well, how could that be? Well, the embalming practice in New Orleans, where he was first buried, was to drain the body of all blood and to fill up the blood vessels with bourbon. Herb immediately latched onto that and said that, that we're 2 peas in a pod. I am, my embalming has been taken care of long ago by Jimmy Russell, the master distiller for wild turkey. So that task is already accomplished. So he said further that he's ready anytime, despite his great longevity, despite the consumption of 2 million cigarettes by his estimation, as well as untold barrels of bourbon. He said that I have taken so many respiratory steroids that I could not pass a drug test for the 2024 Olympics. He says, but on the positive side, to justify my application, he says, I believe upon the fact that I've been in the same business for over 20 years, am over 60 years of age, and have never been indicted, I should be eligible for burial. So that was a winning argument. And sadly, in January 2 years ago, he did pass away, and he is now enjoying his smokes and bourbon on the grounds of the Texas State Cemetery.
It's funny you should mention that about the cemetery, because I had a discussion with Herb, I recalled. We were talking about burial in the state cemetery, and he said, yeah, Bayless kind of got me into this. And he said that there are some problems with being buried in the state cemetery. And I said, well, I know that there is one member buried there that's got a headstone that said, here lies the author of a tax bill. And he said, well, there are other problems. He said, by the way, you better tell your spouse and family and your friends that you still have to pay your own mileage if you get buried in the state cemetery. So
well, the other inducement when I was trying to persuade him to accept this offer was that I told him that he would get free mowing in perpetuity, and so his eye for a bargain, was such that there's no way he was going to pass this up. And I might add that his headstone is nearing completion and will be installed in short order. And one of the engravings on the front side, typical humorous Herb Kelleher, even in death, is of him holding and ready to launch from his right hand a paper airplane.
Oh, cool. That's awesome. That is really cool. Well, okay, so Dr. Cunningham, I want to go back to you just about kind of put on your organizational behavior hat for a minute. Again, as someone who's reached the highest levels of academia, Herb, it appears, was ahead of his time on including the workforce into really getting buy-in. That's kind of, it's interesting that he, as a matter of strategy, seemed to do what all of these organizations right now are struggling to do, but he didn't do it by some. I don't want to put anything in a bad light, but there's just a lot of lip service given to, empowerment of employees and that sort of thing. How much could today's businesses learn from what Herb Kelleher did as setting in motion just the organizational behavior of not just how he treated the individual employees, because like what Senator Monfort said, it is legendary how from everyone from the guy with the earmuffs loading the baggage to those who shared the executive suite with him, they all felt a connection with him. I have a friend that used to bump into Herb at Eddie V's over on Oak Lawn all the time. And one time they were out waiting for a valet. Herb had his cigarette. He just finished dinner. And from then on, every single time my friend John Perry ever ran into Herb, he knew him. And it was Herb that would initiate the conversation. Hey, Perry, how you doing, buddy? He had that connection. But how he scaled that, what could other organizations learn from the leadership of Herb Kelleher now as they all try to get that sort of buy-in from their employees?
As I think about kind of what has made Southwest successful, I think of 4 or 5 things, and I've given this talk many times to many different organizations, but we're a low-cost provider. Every dime counts. We watch every penny. We have one airplane. Tremendous economies of scale associated with one airplane. We just recently made an additional purchase of 100 more 737 MAX 7s as an example. It's an all Boeing fleet. We have low prices for our consumers. We talked about the Southwest effect, how that works so well for us. We have a fortress balance sheet, and that sprung back from the grave, so to speak, to benefit Southwest when we had this crisis we just went through, or we're in right now, the pandemic. We had $4 billion going into the crisis, in our bank account, and we raised $20 billion within 6 or 7 months. And we still today have by far the largest amount of liquidity of any airline on any kind of basis. We have a direct-to-consumer model. We sell direct-to-consumer. All those fuel hedging, all those are important. Every business could learn from those. Those are important things for every business. But what really separated it, in my opinion, was his philosophy that said, no, it's not the customer that counts. It's not. It's the employee. Because if you take care of the employees, they will take care of the customers. So much of modern business, and you can't say, obviously the customer is very important, but it's not a customer-centric, it's an employee-centric operation. And we take care of our employees, they take care of our customers, and Herb learned that, and I don't think most American business has still learned that.
Yeah, no, I could not agree more, Dr. Cunningham. And it's interesting because in a different space where that has been echoed is one of your fellow alum at the Texas Titan podcast is Brett Barrett, who wrote a New York Times best-selling book called, he's a physician, a clinician, that said the patient comes second. With the same mindset, it sounds kind of contrarian, but the idea is you take care of the people that are actually taking care of the patients or the customers. That's when you'll yield the greatest benefit. So, and I guarantee you that if I were to go back and talk to Brett about that, there's probably some Herb Kelleher, DNA that seeped through his neurons to come to that conclusion, because I think that's exactly right.
I don't think you can get away from that. And I also, we've mentioned already, I think John mentioned Colleen Barrett, but we need to mention Colleen, because Colleen is the one who, when Herb was drafted by Sam Barshop to go up to and take over the airline, he had been a founder of, but he was drafted to actually become the CEO. He was a law partner in San Antonio. And he said to Colleen, who worked for him, we're going to Dallas, let's go. And she grabbed her selectric typewriter because she didn't think Southwest Airlines probably had a selectric typewriter, and brought her selectric typewriter with her on the airplane. And they never left. And she became president of the airline. But she was into the corporate culture every bit as much as Herb was. And she was the queen of culture. And she drove that. Every organization has a culture. Southwest Airlines has a culture that's focused on the employee. And that's what makes a difference. I'd like to mention, because I think John would enjoy talking with me about it for a second, the hunts that we went out to on Herb's ranch.
Well, I thought that was off limits.
Well, I want to hear it, because that was my next question for you, Senator Moffett, was, okay, what's Herb doing when he's not running the airline? So perfect segue, Dr. Cunningham.
Well, I guess they were called hunt. They were way out in far West Texas, out far over from Marfa, and that reminds me of a funny anecdote. They didn't have cell service out there for a long time. When I went on one of those hunts when I was at AT&T, and I told Herb, I said, look, you get a couple of hundred of these ranchers together, I believe we can get you a cell tower. And now they've got the best cell tower, I think, in Marfa that any small town in America. but anyway, I would say this: the hunting was probably the last thing on our agenda. There was plenty of free-flowing wild turkey and a lot of good BS. I mean, but he would invite, there'd be 10, 20 people there, and they were all successful people. And you just listen with amazement of all the stories. I wish I would have recorded them, but then I probably wouldn't have lived to be on this conversation.
Let me add a little bit to John's comments, because they were fabulous. The ranch first was 100,000 acres. Okay, it was big enough that there were 4 different climactic zones on the ranch. Just to put it in perspective, we would arrive there on Friday afternoon, and in private planes at different airports. Some of the pilots, we had a bunch of pilots would always fly, and they'd fly the small planes in. We would have a beautiful dinner, right, John, on Friday night.
Yeah. By the way, the pilots would fly and land on the road at the ranch.
On the road, on a curved road. The road would go like this, and the pilots would come in like this, and they'd land their airplanes. I mean, that's not an exaggeration, right, John?
That's right.
And we had a magnificent dinner, of course, full of prime rib steaks and all kinds of things that a cardiologist probably would say we shouldn't eat, but we enjoyed thoroughly. Fine wine, beautiful wine. And then at the end of the dinner, we'd stop, and the dinner went on to 9 o'clock or so. And then we'd sit around the fire and we'd tell stories. And these young pilots, these pilots were 30 years younger than Kelleher. They had the audacity to think that they could out-talk, out-drink, out-smoke Herb Kelleher. And they were amateurs. They were amateurs. On several occasions, Herb and I were roommates. It was like not having a roommate, because I would break off at about 11:30. John Montfort was stronger than I was. He could go longer, but I'd break off around 11:30 and go back to the room. Herb would sit there until 4:30 or 5 in the morning. And when the final pilot passed out, Herb would get up and walk back to the room, sleep for 2 hours, and the next day we'd begin the hunt at 7:30 in the morning. And that's not an exaggeration, is it, John?
That's right. I can recall, I think there was one, in all the hunts we went on, I believe there was one deer killed, and that may have been a road kill.
I have a picture up here in my office with me with an AK-47 at Herb's ranch shooting a tin can. And Herb's in the background. And I never got a shot off. And I don't think Herb, I'm not sure he was all that excited about us killing the animals, actually, because we had to clean them. Those, of course, we didn't clean them. They were all taken care of. I think one pilot shot one deer over the 7 or 8 hunts that I was on. So there was not a lot of gunfire. But John, you might describe the vehicles we used. We used Jones Suburbans. And how are the Suburbans?
They were equipped to hold gallon bottles of liquor in the back. They had these boxes would stack on, and I think we always had a driver who did not drink.
John is being politically correct.
They were hired out of Marfa or Alpine or something just to drive. but that reminds me so much of one thing that I learned from Herb, though, and that is financial discipline in running a company is so important. We really did. In those early days, we counted paper clips, and we stayed in hotels that the springs were popping out of the mattresses. When we'd go to a board meeting, we would have breakfast on paper plates, and wow, it was pretty amazing. But we really did count paper clips and watch our pennies, and I think that was a lesson that really has stuck with me all of my life about the discipline required, the financial discipline that's been required. I've been chairman of the audit committee for a number of years, and I don't think I'm that great, but I just don't think anybody else wants the job because it has certainly been enlightening.
Well, it seems to me like one of the things that really set Herb Kelleher apart is that for a guy that had such an intense job, I mean, under the scrutiny of, first of all, like we've talked about, just trying to get Southwest off the ground, again, literally and figuratively, and as well as just the scrutiny of running a publicly traded company. But he knew how to have fun, and he really seemed to have found that that thing that we're all looking for. He found his lane that he could run in and ran well and had a blast doing it. And that to me, I mean, I can't remember. It's very rare that you see a picture of Herb Kelleher that he doesn't at least look happy, even if he doesn't have a big smile on his face. And so that must have been infectious for you guys, especially again, going back to those tough board meetings, which I've got to believe that there were some through the process where you're just having a leader that can make you feel like, hey, it's going to be okay, because if he's that happy, we're going to do well. And would you agree?
I would agree with that totally, but I would pass on, because we did have some tough meetings, but
Yep.
at the same time, everybody was on the same page. We were all trying to do the same thing. So there was really no conflict, because we understood we were dealing with the smartest guy in the room, and we had a mission, and we were doing everything we could to do that. I would like to mention one thing though. I had dinner with Herb many times, but I had lunch with Herb at least four times a year until he passed away. Within 30 days, I had lunch with him, and I would have lunch with him, and John went a number of times. We would have board meetings. I would go up the morning before the board meeting, and I'd have lunch with Herb. And we never talked really about business. Occasionally, we really told stories and had fun. But what I want you to know is, up until literally within weeks of him passing away, he enjoyed being with people. Yeah. And when he would go into, whether he went to Albernay's, a high dollar place, or some place that was, shall we say, less than high dollar, where he could smoke, everybody knew him. He liked them. He liked the personal interchange with them, the bartenders, the waiters, everybody. It was just an infectious kind of thing. And he had fun, I think, up until he died, which is pretty good.
Yeah. So I'll start with you, Bayless, if you want to take this one first. If Herb Kelleher had not found himself co-founding an airline, I mean, he was an attorney by trade. If he hadn't been the CEO and co-founder of Southwest Airlines, what do you think that he would have been doing?
He told me one time that rock bottom was a lawyer. I mean, he took great pride in that, although that claim seems facetious to anybody who interacted with him. He could have hosted Saturday Night Live, for example, and everything. His humor was just spontaneous. He barely drew a breath before he responded, and either it would be sort of like a velvet covered stiletto in many cases, but just absolutely saturated with good, wholesome humor. So he could have done anything. His entrepreneurial bent was such, pick any profession, any industry.
Yeah, so I don't know the answer, and he may have answered this somewhere in a biography or something, but did he become an attorney because he actually was fascinated with the law, or it was just job security, or just, hey, being an attorney is a good thing to pursue? Or did he at one point want, because I mean, my gosh, I would imagine he would have been a remarkable trial lawyer. I mean, could you imagine Herb Kelleher, trying a case? I mean, did he practice law because he wanted to be an attorney, or do y'all know the history of that?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that comes to mind quickly is when he was huddling with Senator Bob Packwood, his NYU law school friend. They were instantly into the capillaries in excruciating detail, with Herb leading the argument on the violation of the Commerce Clause of the Constitution, restraint of trade, when they were battling Jim Wright and other patrons of the rival airlines. So he was very learned in the law beneath the surface, and it was something to witness. It really was.
Yeah. Any of you other guys want to weigh in?
I think if Herb had opted to go into politics, I think he would have wound up being governor or U.S. senator. He literally he was so gregarious and so well liked and smart. I think he could have succeeded at whatever he opted to do. And fortunately, I think he found the right niche.
Say something that's a little bit different. And I don't really believe this, but I'm going to say it anyway. He might have ended up as a professor.
No, Cunningham, I disagree. And I'll tell you why. One time I was talking with him and he said, do you know what the definition of a faculty senate is? I said, no, Herb, I don't think I do. And he said, it's 900 toes waiting to be stepped on.
Well, I don't doubt that, but I'm going to stick with my story. How's that? And when I say that, I don't think this would have happened because I think Herb really would have been he was a great lawyer, wasn't he, Jim? I mean, he was big time lawyer.
Yeah, he was Zorro.
And he would have made a great lawyer lobbyist.
Oh, no question.
Because he loved people and he loved complex issues. And he made a great CEO, but he could have been a great CEO of any number of corporations. Mm-hmm. But the only reason I come back to this is a little bit is Herb always enjoyed teaching my class. I mean, I think it was something that was important to him. And he was a rock star, but he came to class and he was always well prepared. He always had his yellow pad and he always talked about what he wanted to talk about. And the students asked him lots of questions and there was a lot of interaction. And he genuinely looked forward to coming. I mean, it was something. And afterwards, as Jim Bayless has already mentioned, we would go out to Ruth Chris Steakhouse, and I would invite about 20 or 25 of my pals, Jim Bayless, of course, being one of them here in Austin. And we'd have a delightful dinner, and we'd have a dinner around a big table. And it was a one conversation deal. And we'd have the president of the university would be there, the dean of the business school, the dean of engineering, powerful people. They all want to talk to Herb. They all want to talk to Herb. And so the conversation flowed. Then along the way here, back in, I don't know the exact period, maybe 15 years ago, Herb called me, said, I'd like to make a donation to the University of Texas. He'd been very supportive of UT for many years. And I said, what do you want to think about? He said, entrepreneurship. I want to support an entrepreneurship center. He gave us $5 million. To support the Center for Entrepreneurship, which is the Herbert D. Kelleher Center for Entrepreneurship. Strange how we came up with that name. But that program has supported countless students and countless faculty members. So he was into the education deal. He went to Wesleyan. He majored in English and philosophy. I mean, he was a true scholar. He really was. Yeah. And then he went to New York University Law School. So, Herb touched so many bases. I think what Jim and John were all saying, he could have done just about anything he wanted to.
Yeah. And I think one of the coolest things that as I researched Herb and got to, he's kind of like one of my virtual mentors, someone that I've never met but I do look to for emulation. And, for a guy that was from New Jersey, I can't think, kind of like you, Dr. Cunningham, with your Michigan roots, it's hard to think of a guy that fit into the Texas culture any better than Herb Kelleher. I mean, he just exuded that entrepreneurial spirit, the go big or go home. He just in every way was that, just had that Texan in him already. So, I will always think of him as kind of that. I'll associate him with Texas. And now in the Texas State Cemetery, I mean, if that doesn't tell you something, because that's hard to do, right? There's not many non-Texans in there, right, Bayless?
That's true. And one anecdote that comes to mind, he was telling me that he was in conversation with a big dinner group at his house, including his brother, from New Jersey, who I think at the time, if not today, still lives in New Jersey. And his brother had heard this soliloquy 100,000 times about the free enterprise, capitalistic wonders of the state of Texas. And this is nirvana. There's no better place than Texas to live your life in terms of the business climate, the actual climate, the people, and we go on and on and on and on. And early in this umpteenth soliloquy that his brother had heard so many times, he interrupts Herb and says, Herb, can you just cut to the cliff notes? But you're right. He was a very proud Texan.
I love it. Well, gentlemen.
Let me tell one final story if I can.
Go, Dr. Cunningham.
Just because it's a cute story. It's one story I told at his memorial. and we had 5,000 people at his memorial. And the only reason we had 5,000 is we locked the doors.
Wow.
We would have had more. And I talked about a series of things, many of which we've talked about today, but I ended up by saying, Herb and I had lunch, as I told you, regularly. And we ate at high dollar places, but we also ate at the Northwest Point Bar and Grill, which was not the highest dollar place in Dallas. And for several reasons, one of which was they let him not only have a drink, which they were happy to serve, but they let him smoke. And at the end of the lunch, and this was not just to be clear, this was not a strip joint or anything like that. It was a bar. It was a legitimate kind of local bar, but it was in an area that had some rather different businesses. And as we walked out, a woman came along and I said, take our picture. And I handed her my cell phone. And I said, now focus it this way. And so she focused it on Herb and me, and I have this picture, and I showed this picture at his memorial. And it had the two of us there, obviously having fun together. And in the back, there was a big sign of a store. And the sign said, condoms to go. And I said to Herb, and I showed that picture. But I said to Herb, I said, I think we got it in condoms to go. And he looked at me and he said, I thought all condoms were to go.
Oh my goodness. That is awesome. Well, so see, it shows even a captain of industry, he's got, is just a human being with it had a sharp wit. I love it. Well, gentlemen, I am so grateful. I mean, I told you that hour would fly by, and you guys, I told you I have looked forward to this conversation like a kid looking forward to Christmas, and you guys did not disappoint. Before we go, I would like to just do a quick little lightning round. We'll just go in order that we started. Bayless and Dr. Cunningham and Senator Montfort, just real quick, what Herb Kelleher meant to you and what this audience can learn from his legacy.
Enjoy life to its fullest.
Well said. Well said.
People. He lived through people. He loved people, and people made him, but he made people.
Love it. Senator?
Equating an organization to a finely tuned watch, in that every piece part, every person that participates is important for its success, no matter what their job is or what they do. And you've got to make them feel like they are making a contribution to the success of the operation.
Well, gentlemen, I tell you what, with your memories of Herb Kelleher, you certainly contributed to the success of the Texas Titans podcast. This is the most fun I'm going to have this week, I guarantee you. And I am so very thankful for all of your friendship, the fact that you're a Texas Titan alum, and that you would take this time for me and my audience. I am truly grateful. So, and also I want to wish all of you guys a very happy Good Friday and a happy Easter. Godspeed to all of you. I'm so grateful. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
Jason, thank you very much.
All right.